thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. In Christ Jesus our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory now and forever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. I had a couple of questions that we need to answer. So there was a question about the tribes in Revelation. And in Revelation, we talked about in Genesis how Jacob adopted the two children of Joseph and made them his own and became tribes in Israel, the tribe of Manasseh and the tribe of Ephraim. And in the blessing that Jacob had given to his children, you would see, let's go there first. Go to Genesis, and it's at the blessing of Jacob, which is toward the end, maybe 47. 47. That is when he took the two children. That's going to be the 48, I'm sorry. So he said, now therefore your two sons, he's Jacob speaking to his son Joseph. Now therefore your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine, as Reuben and Simeon. Reuben is the firstborn, Simeon is the secondborn. They shall be mine, for your offspring whom you beget after them shall take possession of their inheritance within the tribes of their brothers. But as for me, when I came from Mesopotamia of Syria, Rachel died beside me in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. So then Israel saw Joseph's son and said, who are these with you? So Joseph said to his father, these are my sons, God gave me here. Jacob then said, bring them to me that I may bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were dim by reason of old age, and he could not see. Then Joseph, you notice here everybody gets older and get cataract and they can see. Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed and embraced them. Then Israel said to Joseph, I had not thought to see your face. In fact, God has also shown me your seed. Joseph brought them from beside his knees, and they bowed down with their face to the ground. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel, left hand, and Manasseh with his left hand. Sorry. So we'll share the screen. So Joseph brought the two sons. Manasseh was the firstborn. So he had to put him on the right hand of Jacob to be blessed. The right hand is the hand of the blessing. And then he got Ephraim, the younger, and put him on the left hand of Jacob. So then Jacob crossed his arms. So he stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, the younger, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, guiding his hands knowingly. They said he crossed his hands. They was a sign of the cross over them. For Manasseh was the firstborn. Then he blessed them and said, God before whom my fathers Abraham, Isaac were well-pleasing, the God who has fed me all my life long to this day, the angel who redeemed me from all evil, bless these lads. Joseph seeing this, he was not happy. And Joseph said to his father, not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. So it's not like a mistake. I didn't make a mistake. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be exalted. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. Manasseh will be the biggest tribe. He will take the biggest piece of land. But the king will come from Ephraim, the first king in Israel, which was Saul will become the king, and then from there the 10 tribes, the 10 tribes that will be split from David will be given to Ephraim. So Saul was a Benjaminite. But Ephraim will take over the leadership of the country later. So this is 2 tribes in Israel, and we said in return there were 1 tribe out. So Joseph was not named in the tribes. Joseph was not named in the tribes, nor Levi. Levi was out of the naming of the tribe. So you have Levi and Joseph out. So Danny is making a complaint. Where are the notes? I see. Okay. Danny has a voice. Eventually. So this is what we found in Genesis, that the two sons of Joseph became 2 tribes in Israel, and 2 other tribes were taken out. Joseph, the father, was out, and also Levi as the tribe of the priests, that they had not had a portion of the land in Israel. So let's go to the book of Revelation, and the question was about the book of Revelation. How come in the book of Revelation we don't see Ephraim, we see Joseph, and we don't see Dan, and Levi is back? So let us go to the book of Revelation, and it is in chapter 7. Talks about the tribes of Israel to be sealed. And so they list the tribes of Israel in the book of Revelation. So 12 tribes, so they're going to be named. The tribe of Reuben, actually the tribe of Judah is first, tribe of Judah. And we said, what about Judah? Why is he the first to be mentioned, although he's not the firstborn? But when we talked about the blessing, the first 4 kids of Jacob is Reuben, Simeon, Levi, then Judah. And we said Reuben had done something very bad, and his father excluded him from the firstborn blessing. He's not deserving of the firstborn blessing. So it had to go to either Simeon or Levi, and both of them were together in killing the people of Shechem. Then the 4th one, which is Judah became the tribe or the person to carry the blessing of the firstborn because of that he had done nothing to exclude him. His father was pleased with him, although he had some personal issues, but he did not dishonor his father. That's the point. So his father gave him the blessing of the firstborn, which passed from Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. When you look at Gad, Gad is the firstborn of Zilpah. Let's go back to that. So Gad comes after that. Gad and Asher, these are Zilpah's children. We skipped over Dan. Dan is the firstborn of Bela. So you have 2 wives, 2 concubines. 2 wives is Leah and Rachel. Judah and Reuben is Leah. Gad and Asher are Zilpah. So we skipped over Dan. No one knows a definite answer why Dan is not mentioned at all. While Naphtali is the brother of Dan, so he comes after that. Then you have Manasseh before Ephraim. Things are going in a very interesting arrangement here. Then Simeon, Then Levi is back into the naming. Issachar, Zebulun, and then Joseph. What does that mean? Because we thought that we're going to take Joseph out and Levi and included Manasseh and Ephraim. But Manasseh is there, Ephraim is not there, and Dan is not there. So most probably Joseph here is Ephraim. Because if Ephraim was considered the firstborn of Joseph, so he represents Joseph. So you can think of Joseph as Ephraim, because Manasseh, the other son of Joseph, is mentioned. It's here. Manasseh is here. So Ephraim is Joseph. And why is he mentioned as Joseph? I don't have a definite answer, but he is mentioned as his father. And then Benjamin. So I have an explanation why Ephraim is not mentioned, because Joseph is Ephraim. He's a direct descendant of Joseph. And then why is, because Manasseh is the other brother. So where is Dan? There's many speculations about Dan. Dan was mentioned in the blessing of Jacob as, when you go to Jacob blessing, when you go to the blessing of Jacob, which is 49, there's something about Dan that was very worrisome. So he listed all his children, and he comes to Dan and said something very worrisome. Dan is the beginning of the firstborn of Bela, of Jacob from Bela. So Jacob had 4 firstborn children. That's Reuben, Dan, Gad, and Joseph. Let's go to Dan. Here we go. Dan shall judge, because Dan means judge. Dan shall judge his own people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent. So of all the animals animals and plants. So, for example, Judah is a lion, Benjamin is a wolf, Dan is a serpent. He calls him a serpent and a viper. That's not a very good description if you put this in one book with the serpent who tricked the forefathers into sinning. So that's very, very suspicious that Dan would become a tribe that will be an enemy. So they say that may be why at the end, and I want to make sure that this chapter is talking about something that you understand. Chapter 7 in Revelation talks about the church. Church as the new Israel. So all this list is not just Israel. This is the church. There is no Dan in the church. There is no vipers. There is no serpents. It's the church without that malicious evil, the deception that was in the serpent of old. So Dan is outside this list. And I think that's the only explanation we can understand, that they might be lions and wolves and, donkeys. And, there was a donkey in the name, one of the names, I think it was Issachar or Asher, I forgot. So that's what I think I can understand from the list. This is about the church. And I'm going to tell you this maybe when we talk about the New Testament. This is a big theme about the new Israel. Church is the new Israel, the remnant of Israel in the new time. I hope that answers the question. So let's go to today's session. I'm glad that you didn't have a struggle with the questions. So let us go through. We need to get this out of the way. Here. Now we move to what we call the silent years. What do I mean by the silent years? The years where there's no prophets. Now it's going to turn into pure history, when heaven is completely quiet. And Israel has to sort things through. It's a very tough time. One of the toughest time in the history of Israel and the people of God. So this time started from the exile and the post-exilic prophets all the way to the coming of Christ. This is we're talking about 400, 500 years. So we're gonna talk about what happened after the exile. The exile, what we call the Babylonian exile. We're gonna go back and rehash the main points of the exile events. The Babylonian exile is the name generally given to the deportation and the exile of the Jews. I think these are pieces taken from Nelson maps and charts. It's very straightforward quotation from there. The Babylonian exile is the name generally given to the deportation and exile of the Jews of the ancient kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom, to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar II, the man who conquered all this area and established the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonian exile is distinguished from the earlier exile of citizens of the northern kingdom of Israel to Assyria around 722 BC. So it should be BC, not BCE. Difference: BC is before Christ, BCE before Common Era. Before Common Era, we don't talk about Common Era. We talk about the year of the Lord. So it's before Christ. We need to remove that E. The exile in Babylon, which directly affected mainly those of the upper class of society. So what the Nebuchadnezzar had done is took the noblemen of Jerusalem with him to Babylon, left the poorest of the poor, people who are not educated, they're not learned, they have no craft. He left them in the country, so the country was left very poor and illiterate and weak. So nobody can plan for a revolt against them anymore. It happened in 3 waves, and the return would be in 3 waves. So he took them in 3 portions, 3 trips. When they started rebelling against them. The Bible portrays the internal cause of the captivity as the sins of Judah in failing to rid itself of idolatry and refusing to heed prophetic warnings not to rebel against Babylon. This was mainly Jeremiah. Jeremiah said, you know why you're going to be taken out of here? And he listed all the breaking of the commandments that they had done. So in exile, there were at least 2 kingdoms, 2 empires that will take turn in ruling over the area and in maintaining the exile. The first period is called the Babylonian Period. This period is under the rule of the Babylonian Empire. And this started from 606. We're going back to 536, 70 years. This is exactly what Jeremiah had prophesied. He said, you will have 70 years in exile. And why? What was the reason that God decreed 70 years on Israel? Jeremiah explained. He said, Moses in the law that God gave said to rest the ground, don't plant anything in it, 1 year every 7 years. So you have to rest it the 7th year. You plant it 6 years, but in the 6th year, God will make sure that you get enough food that it will last you that 1 whole year until you start planting and sowing and harvesting again, which is something that happened similar in the wandering. When they were collecting on the 6th day, double the portion that they will collect every day of manna, so that the Friday portion of manna would cover then also Saturday. Same thing for the land. When they come into the promised land, they would have to work all the 6 years, and the 7th year, because it's a Sabbath, it's a rest year, they have to rest the land. The land should not be cultivated. So what happened? Jeremiah said, you didn't keep this law. You worked the land in the 7th year. You never had to stop the land at all. You never stopped cultivating the land. So there was actually 70 years of collected or indebted time of rest. Do you get that? So how many years do you think they spend in the land since they entered the promised land until the exile? How many years? If every 7 years, they have to rest 1 year. So they counted all the years, they came up to 70 years. He said, you're going to be out of the land, and the land will have to rest against your wishes. 70 years. If we know that it's 1 in 7, so how many years do you think they spent in the land without taking that year? Do the math. 490 years, exactly. So it's almost 500 years they've been in the promised land. They had not rested the land every 7th year. So that accumulated to 70 years of exile. This is the reason why Jeremiah had predicted this will be the time. When Daniel looked at the book of Jeremiah, I said, the 70 years are up. What's going on now? And then this, when the kingdom of Babylon ended and Persia started taking over, and the first king in Persia, Cyrus, was moved, God moved him to turn everybody back to their country and their land and to build their temple. This is exactly what happened. So the prophecy of Jeremiah regarding captivity, you can read about it in the reference. The stages of captivity, one under Jehoiakim, which is the son of Josiah, and this from 606 to 597, 9 years, and in this time Daniel was taken from Jerusalem. And his son Jehoiachin, this was 597, 586, during this 11 years, Ezekiel was taken. And then the last and the final one, during Zedekiah, the uncle, the brother of Jehoiakim, and this from 586 to 536, 50 years. Jerusalem and the temple were burned in the third wave of exile. So 3 waves of exile under 3 kings. This was maybe right at the end of the life of Jehoiakim and the beginning of the second. Jehoiakim never got to rule in Jerusalem. When we talk about the empires that ruled, the first empire was Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar the first, and the 3 exiles happened under him from 605 to 562. His son, his name is Belshazzar. They say his son, but actually he was his grandson. History records that he was actually the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, and he reigned with his father Nabonidus. Nabonidus was gone most of the time on campaigns. He hated being in Babylon. He lived in another city, and he ruled. He didn't want to rule, actually. His son Belshazzar was a co-reigning king with his father. That's why in history they were very, very confused, because the Bible said something about that, and they didn't understand until they uncovered certain things in Babylon in the excavation, and they found that he was actually co-reigning. Belshazzar was co-reigning with his father. A grandfather is generally referred as father in the scripture in the Bible. The second kingdom is Persia, starting with Cyrus. That's from the period, so you end up in 539. 536, Persian Empire started, to 334. That's 200 years. 200 years of Persian rule. The first one is Cyrus. Cyrus, then Darius, then Artaxerxes. Cyrus, he ordered the rebuilding of the temple. He ruled Persia all the way to 530. Darius, he completed the building of the temple in his reign, and he ruled all the way to 486. Artaxerxes, he started, in his time, the temple was adorned and beautified. And also in his time, the city was built. He is the same as... that's not the same. There's, or the Bible will call him Xerxes or Ahasuerus. The returns are 3. So they're returning from, there's 2 ruling kingdoms during the exile, Babylonia and Persia. And they return through during the time of Persia. The first return under Zerubbabel, we'll talk about Zerubbabel soon. And this was 536 to 516. The deliverance of the Jews under Esther, that's the same, almost the same time, or time after it, came after that. And this may be under the time, during the time of Nehemiah. So the second return under Ezra, Ezra the scribe, the priest. And there's an interval of time there was nothing happening. And then the third return is under Nehemiah. So you got Zerubbabel, Ezra, Nehemiah, 3 returns. And the final word of Malachi, the last of the prophets, came at the end of this time, at the time of Nehemiah. So Malachi and Nehemiah were partners. While Haggai is in the time of Zerubbabel. Zechariah also was the time of Zerubbabel. So Zechariah and Haggai was up here, and Malachi was in the time of Nehemiah at the end. And all these are references from the Bible if you want to go and read. So this is the first piece that I want to tell you. I'm not going to ask you for the years, but at least for the sequence of events. So from the outside, let me review this very quickly. The exile happened under the Babylonian rule of Nebuchadnezzar. And in his time, there were 3 kings, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, that's his son, and Zedekiah, that's the brother of Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim and Zedekiah were the children of Josiah. Jehoiachin was the grandchild of Josiah, the son of Jehoiakim. And during their time, there were 3 exiles. One, when Daniel was taken. The second, Ezekiel was taken. And the third is where the Jerusalem and the temple were completely burned. When they spent the 70 years of exile, there were 2 ruling kingdoms, Babylon and Persia. And there were 4 decrees of return. The first one by the Cyrus, and we talked about Cyrus as the anointed of the Lord, where God actually called Cyrus to have people return back and build the temple. Then Darius, and then eventual Artaxerxes or Artaxerxes. And in his time, the temple was finished, and the city was, this is the time of Nehemiah, the time of Nehemiah. So this also happened in the time of Esther. The second return under Ezra, and this corresponds to, so this is 48-47. This is during this time, during this king. So the first one in the 600, and this is during Cyrus. This is the beginning. Zerubbabel is the one who commissioned Cyrus. Darius is the one who commissioned Ezra. And the last one, Xerxes or Artaxerxes, is the one that commissioned Nehemiah during the time of Queen Esther. And Malachi comes to finish this, while Haggai and Zechariah are in the beginning, when they were actually doing. Zechariah speaks a lot about Zerubbabel and Joshua, the high priest. Zechariah mentions Zerubbabel by name. So you have that. And Haggai talks about building the temple. So you have them in the beginning. The temple that was rebuilt is named under Zerubbabel. Who is Zerubbabel? He's the grandchild of? Anybody knows? He's the grandchild of this king. So Jehoiakim has a son, and the son had a son, the grandson of Jehoiakim. His name is Zerubbabel. So he's from the line of David. He is a royal person. People got so excited when Zerubbabel was appointed the governor of Judea, and they thought, okay, the kingdom is coming back. The line of David is coming back. The return of the king. But then they got disappointed because Zerubbabel was called back to Babylon, never to be seen again in the area. We'll talk about that in a second. Now we move to the Post-Exertic Period. So the temple is built, the city walls are built by Nehemiah, and they sorted things out, but things are not the same. They say something about this. They say that when the temple, the second temple of Zerubbabel was built, Ezekiel spoke about that temple. He said this is going to be a very glorious temple, huge temple, big temple, beautiful temple, glorious temple, etc. But when the temple of Zerubbabel was finished, the very old people that returned from the exile, that had been in Jerusalem when the temple was knocked down, those people who had a memory of the first temple, Temple of Solomon, when they looked at the finished temple of Zerubbabel, they cried. They wept. Why? It was nothing. They said, this is nothing. Where is this temple that Ezekiel had promised? So somebody today told me that someone of the kids in somewhere in Europe, converted to Judaism from Christian. He was a deacon, whatever. And I said, if he just understood that it's very desperate to look at promises that is not fulfilled in the Old Testament, it's really disappointing. It's almost like a scam. Unless Christ comes and does what he did, the rest of the promises are very difficult to swallow. So when God said to Abraham, I'll make you a blessing to all the tribes of the earth, where is that? Where is the children of Jacob as a blessing to all the earth? When he comes and says, David, you will have a child after you die, and he will be the heir of the kingdom, and his kingdom will have will be forever. Where is that? So those people in the exile, they would say, where is the kingdom of David that God promised that will be forever? It's not forever. What's happening? That's why many Jews today, they will say, we give up. We're done. We're not following that anymore. So this is the feeling of those people staying in the land after the exile. So let's move on to the next empire. Alexander the Macedonian, or they call him in history Alexander the Great, conquered the Persian Empire in 330 BC. He defeated the last Persian king, who was very weak. But Alexander was a very civilized person. He didn't want to, kill the king, but he had two persons with him kill him before Alexander arrived. Alexander actually married his daughter. And he was more interested in civilizing people and educating them and bringing them to the Greek lifestyle, the Greek philosophy, the Greek law, the Greek everything. They call this movement, this word was coined by a German historian, they call it Hellenization. To Hellenize is to spread the Greek language, culture, population into the former Persian Empire after Alexander's conquest of Persian domain. After Alexander died, we said that he died in his 30s. Why did he died young? Some people say he was depressed because he conquered the world too early. He subdued many countries. He went all the way to India, and he found no place else to subdue, so he got depressed and died with depression. After Alexander, the empire was divided between his strongest generals. The main three empires which ruled the Near East were the Seleucids. I'm just going to talk about the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Seleucids and Ptolemies. The family of the Seleucids, one of the generals, his name was Seleucus, ruled West Asia. So you're talking about Persia, even all the way to India, all that place, and all the way west to Palestine and the Arabian Peninsula. This is the area of the Seleucids. While the western part of the kingdom, which had the main city, Alexandria, especially Egypt, that's what we're talking about, it is the Ptolemies. Who is the last king or queen of the Ptolemies? Anybody knows? Cleopatra. And Cleopatra had a very interesting history, that's why she's famous. Very interesting history. She tried to be, we'll talk about her in a little bit. So the Seleucids in West Asia, including Palestine, that's the main part of the empire, the Greek empire that we want to talk about. The Seleucids followed an aggressive Hellenizing plan of Judea. They wanted people to be Greek. The most aggressive of the Seleucids were Antiochus IV. He called himself Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus, the revelation of God. God is revealed in him. That's how he felt himself. The Jews on the other side called him Antiochus Epimanes, which means the crazy. Antiochus the crazy. Why? History is divided over that. We'll see what happened. So he was the most aggressive Hellenizing ruler of the Seleucids. He ruled from 175 BC until he died in 164 BC. Not much, 11 years. We're coming closer to the birth of Christ here. Careful now, we're coming very much into this time. Some Jews, mainly those of the urban upper class, notably what we call the Tobiat family, wished to dispense altogether with Jewish law and to adopt a Greek lifestyle. This is interesting. They said, we don't want anything from the Torah or Moses or the synagogues or any of it. We want to be Greeks. We are so much interested to be the civilized people. We want to be like them. According to some historians, the main motive for the Tobiates' Hellenism was economic and political. They didn't really care much for the religion. They wanted just to be as rich as they can. And to be rich, you have to deal with the Greeks, because they were once controlling the trade and everything. So they said, we're not going to benefit anything from keeping the law of Moses. Let's just side with the Greeks and be like them. We trade with them and we marry into them, and we will be rich and politically powerful. They built a gymnasium in Jerusalem, competed in international Greek games. Anybody saw the movie Ben-Hur? They had a racing arena in Jerusalem, and this was not by the Romans. It was actually before the Romans. It was in the time of the Greeks. They built a gymnasium in Jerusalem, competed in international Greek games, removed their marks of circumcision. How we do that? I don't know. I really don't know how you do reverse circumcision. It's very interesting. And repudiated the Holy Covenant. That's how it is written in Jewish history. When Antiochus IV Epiphanes became ruler of the Seleucid Empire in 175 BC, the high priest in Jerusalem was Onias III. Maybe he was one of the Tobiat family. To Antiochus, the high priest was merely a local governor within his realm. Why? Because there was no king. Guess who took over the leadership of the city and the kingdom? The high priest. The high priest took both the religious leadership and also the political leadership. So when the Greeks looked for someone to deal with the Jews, all the Jews listened to the high priest, so he would be the ruler power. You see this in Pilate when he talks to the high priest in the matter of executing Jesus. The high priest becomes the spokesperson for the kingdom. So Antiochus looked at the high priest as a local governor who could be appointed or dismissed at will. While to Orthodox Jews, he was divinely appointed. How can you think about the high priest like this? So this explains to you why in the time of Jesus there were two high priests. Think about it. This is the same thing as having two patriarchs at the same time. You know, the Catholic Church had done it. We don't know how, but in our tradition, you cannot have two popes at the same time, can you? For one pope to be appointed, it means that the pope before him had died. He had left us. So to them, he was just merely a political figure. He can be appointed or dismissed at will. This is the beginning of having two high priests living, or maybe three, or maybe five. Okay? Assassinations, conspiracies, bribery, and division characterized that period. Antiochus pillaged the temple, attacked Jerusalem, and led captive the women and the children. From this point onward, Antiochus pursued a zealous Hellenizing policy. The history says we don't know why. Why all of a sudden he went crazy on them. They say, most probably, this is not characteristics of Greek rulers. Greek rulers were very, what's the word I want to use? Like Cyrus, understanding. They don't want any trouble in their domains, so they want to appease everybody. They let everybody do everything if they don't trouble the ruler. They can do whatever. They want to worship anything, they can worship anything. This is something that they have picked up through history. But why did he do that? Why in the middle of it he turns against them and go crazy? Nobody knows. He made possession of the Torah capital offense and burned the copies he could find. Anyone who would have the Torah in their house or in the synagogue would be executed and the copy will be burned. According to First Maccabees, he banned many traditional Jewish religious practices. Jewish sacrifice was forbidden. Sabbaths and feasts were banned. Circumcision was outlawed. And mothers who circumcised their babies were killed along with their families. Altars to Greek gods were set up and animals prohibited to Jews were sacrificed, like pigs, dogs. They will made sacrifices on the altars. The idol of Olympian Zeus was placed on the altar of the temple. This is what Daniel had spoken about. The stories of Jewish martyrs were recorded in 2nd Maccabees. The Coptic Church celebrates their martyrdom, commemorating them in the Synaxarium. We have them. We have a day for, I think her name was Salome, and we have, I think, a priest who refused to eat pigs, to eat pork, and they were actually having the Torah in their homes. So there's this woman, it's a beautiful story actually, in the 2nd Maccabees. So with her 4 kids, the husband is killed already, and they are actually going to torture them one by one until they renegate all their Jewish identity. So the talk that mother gave to the governor, it's just heart-wrenching. She says to the child who's going to be executed in front of her, said, I don't know how you were formed in my womb. I'm going to give you to the same person who made you. I'm not worried. So they killed all of them, and at the end they killed her. I think her name was Salome. It's in our Synaxarium. You'll find that story. It's from 2nd Maccabees. So those martyrs are considered by the church martyrs. The Hellenic influence pervaded everything, and even in the very strongholds of Judaism, it modified the organization of the state, the laws, public affairs, art, science, and industry, affecting even the ordinary things of life and the common associations of the people. The inscription forbidding strangers to advance beyond a certain point in the temple was in Greek for the first time. The temple, every language, they know every letter written in the temple is Hebrew. It had to be Hebrew. Although the people were not speaking Hebrew, Aramaic, since they came back from the exile, all the language was Aramaic, but the temple kept the Hebrew language as a sacred language. In the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, he changed it and forced them to write it in Greek. And was probably made necessary by the presence of numerous Jews from Greek-speaking countries at the time of the festivals. The coffers in the temple was contained, the shekel contributions were marked in Greek letters. It is therefore no wonder that there were synagogues of the Libertines, Cyrenians, Alexandrians, Sicilians, Asiatics in the holy city itself. That's unheard of before. That's why in the day of Pentecost we hear those people are there in the city. This was during Antiochus Epiphanes' reign. Now, this is the condition during the time from the Babylonians. After the Babylonians were finished, the Persians came. Cyrus is the conqueror of the Babylonian Empire. He allowed the Jews to come back. The exile is ended. Now they are in the post-exilic time, and you have the last 3 prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and the last of the last is Malachi, and that's it. Then they go into this very dark time of persecution with the Greeks. I want to move to the next piece, which is going to shed light on the 1st century events. If you understand this, you understand a lot of the stories that we read in the Gospel. When this happened, you have a family of Mattathias family. And the firstborn of Mattathias is Judas Maccabees. That's why they call this movement the Maccabean Revolt. Mattathias and his son led a revolt along the lines of guerrilla warfare. They didn't really structure the army to fight against the Greeks and Antiochus. They started doing a counter-terrorism, if you can call it that way. They forced Jewish boys to circumcise and threatened the lives of complacent Jews. They say, if you don't circumcise your children, we'll kill you. Are you afraid of Antiochus? You should be more afraid of us. So the Jews didn't know where to get it from. The initial attempts to quell them by Antiochus IV, the Antiochus Epiphanes, failed. The Maccabees were encouraged by these failed attempts and increased their numbers and efforts. They went even worse. The Seleucids were further weakened after the death of Antiochus in 164. Then his successor, his name is Lysias. In an attempt, he found himself in a very difficult place where guerrilla warfare is against him, and he doesn't know where he's going to get it from. So he wanted to pacify the Jews. So he made peace with them, allowed them to regain their religious practices, Lysias, for a little bit. This allowed the Maccabees to take hold of the temple, clean all the stuff that Antiochus had done in it, and they purified it. They took a lot of time to purify it. At one point, this is something I need to say, I didn't write it in the notes, they had to bring olive oil for the menorah in the temple. This is one of the things that they needed to start. The Jerusalem area had no olive oil. It was a wartime, very difficult time. So they sent a messenger who would have to go for 8 days to bring, 4 days going, 4 days coming, to bring the olive oil. And in the store, in the temple, they had only 1 day supply of the menorah. Miraculously, they say, in the Maccabees, that oil lasted for 8 days until the messenger came with the oil. That's why this feast is called Hanukkah, and they celebrate it with a menorah of 8 branches. That's what we call in the Gospel of St. John. You read about it in chapter 10. When Jesus was walking, it was a winter time, and he was walking in the in Solomon Porch, and it was the feast of the rededication, the dedication of the temple. This is what the feast is about. This is a feast that comes from Maccabees. The feast of the renovation of the temple. They're dedicated to worship according to the Torah, but it's too late. The Maccabees, that started as a religious revolt against the desecration of the temple, it became a political movement looking for political independence. They started as people who were zealots, very zealous for the Jewish tradition and law. Now they moved into becoming people looked to them. They said they will be the ones to free us from the rule of the Greeks and whoever comes after that. And this begins what we know as the Hasmonean Dynasty, Al-Hashemiyin. That's the name, Hasmonean. Mattathias' descendants. That's how it is established. The Jews saw themselves as an independent again for the first time since 587, when the exile happened. But were they truly independent? Not really. So we're going to have a little bit of timeline. Starting at 140 BC to 110 BC, they ruled semi-autonomously from the disintegrating Seleucids. The Seleucid Empire started to go down, getting weaker and weaker and weaker. So they are actually now, the Hasmoneans started to rise as the family. We're going to look into their family tree. From 110 to 63 BC, they are fully independent. This is when they are actually become very independent. How many years? 57 years, right? 57 years. Fully independent, invading surrounding territories, including Samaria, Galilee, Etruria, Perea, and Edomia, restoring Judea to Solomonic size at the time of King Solomon. This is what the Hasmoneans have done, gaining a lot of power and momentum. 63 to 37, the Roman comes. They were not left alone for long. And we're going to know about the Romans. How did the Roman come? Simple. At that time, the last of the... Now we're going to go talk about the Ptolemies. I'm going to talk about them in a second. Cleopatra was making relationship with the Roman Empire through Julius Caesar. And she had a child from him. She called him Caesarion. But then Julius gets assassinated. And who takes over? His generals are fighting now. There is a civil war, especially Octavius, and who's the second one in his big generals, Julius' generals? Octavius and Mark Antony. So after the death of Julius, Cleopatra decided to befriend Mark Antony, and actually they had an affair, and Mark Antony used Egypt under Cleopatra to fight Octavius. But who won? Octavius. In a sea battle near Greece, it's called Actium, and he defeated the Egyptian fleet miserably. They burned all the ships. When Cleopatra and Mark Antony hear of it, Antony commits suicide. He knew that Octavius is not going to let him live. And Cleopatra, hearing of his suicide, she also goes, and the history says that she commits suicide by taking poison. Some tales said that she had used a venomous serpent, but that's not the case. She killed herself with a poison, and she dies. And by her death ends the last of the Ptolemies, Cleopatra was the last of the Ptolemies. And Octavius makes himself Augustus. That's the new title. And he takes over all the region. And he goes into Jerusalem, fights the Jews, massacred them, actually. He sent Bombay, and Bombay killed almost many hundreds of thousands of the Jews and takes over Judea, Samaria, Galilee, the whole area, and turned this place into a Roman occupation place. Then comes Herod. Let's talk about that Hasmoneans for a second. So Hasmonean, this is a picture, so a little bit faint. Mattathias is the father, and he's 166 BC. And his children, the most important, that one had the name, is the one that was most active is Judas Maccabees. This one, Judas Maccabees. But the one that's going to continue the line is Simon Maccabees, or Maccabeus. Simon had 3 children. The most important of them is John Hyrcanus. That one. Oh, here. John Hyrcanus, this one. John Hyrcanus begets Alexander Jannaeus. Just remember that line. It goes like that. And then from there, you have Aristobulus II. Aristobulus II begets Alexander. And Alexander has a daughter, her name is Mariamne the First. Listen to this. Who married King Herod the Great, who massacred the children in Bethlehem in the time of the birth of Christ. So one thing you notice here, this is a family most probably from the priest side. It's a priestly family. Herod is not that part of this family. He marries himself into this family by marrying the daughter of the line of the Maccabees. And he makes himself the king of Judea. He was a terrible person, very murderous. He killed his wife, I think he killed Mariamne herself, and I think also a child or 2 of his. Whenever he feels that somebody is threatening him, he goes and kills them. So this is the Hasmoneans, and this is the rule of the Hasmoneans as you reach closer to the Romans. As you reach closer to the Romans. His father was also a close friend of the Romans when they came, the father of Herod. We talked about the Ptolemies in Egypt. The list of kings ended with Cleopatra, who looked to Rome to regain some power over Egypt, but got entangled in the Roman civil war. She had an affair with Julius Caesar. She allied with Mark Antony after the assassination of Julius. Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra in the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. Octavius took over Egypt and the whole area. The era of the Roman Empire began. Octavius changed his title to Augustus Caesar. During his time, Christ the Lord was born, especially during the time of the census that he made. And so this is a little bit history about what happened between. It's a messy piece. It's a very big, messy piece. Now, when you move to the leadership in Judea, in the post-exilic era, I want to talk about the leaders now. After the exile, the last king of Judah, Jehoiachin, son of Jehoiakim, and grandson of Josiah, was taken to Babylon. That's the last king that we can tell as a legitimate heir to the throne of David. Never returned to Jerusalem. The grandson of Jehoiakim, Zerubbabel, was appointed a governor over Judea. You read this relationship between the two in Matthew 1st chapter, the genealogy of Jesus. In the first wave of the return to begin the building of the temple, Zerubbabel built the temple. That's the temple. The temple is named after him. They call it the second temple. About Herod, it's the third temple. First temple is Solomon, second temple is Zerubbabel, the third temple is Herod. Zerubbabel was never enthroned, and after a short stay, he was returned to Babylon, never to return to Judea. Nobody heard of him again. The leadership was taken by the high priest Joshua, who came with him. The line of high priests took over the role of the kings in the post-exilic time. During the fight against the Hellenization, the Maccabees became the leaders of the nation. Their movement became the roots of the sect of the Pharisees. They especially enforced the keeping of the Sabbath and the purity laws. On the other side, the senior priest and the families of the high priest, so Maccabees were not part of this group of the priests at the time. The high priest and the priest were influenced by the political pressure since the Greek rule. We said that. They could appoint one high priest, they can retire the priest, they can actually lay off the priest, he becomes like an employee of the Greek ruler. So that's how the high priest and the priest became the Sadducees. Why? Because their fate was in the hands of the governor. So they slowly developed a lax. So you have the zealots, zealous Pharisees, which were the Maccabees, and you have the priests and the high priests who were very much politically involved, that they let go of their beliefs, and they kept only the ones that would help them in their jobs in the temple. They were not interested in studying the Torah, not interested in keeping the law of God. They were interested to keep their place, their job. Now I want to move to the Sanhedrin, which was the legislative and judiciary governing body in Israel, was formed in the latter part of the post-exilic era. We don't know exactly when the Sanhedrin started to exist, but we know that it was made of three elements. The Pharisees. Who are the Pharisees? The descendants of the Maccabees. And the high priest, the senior priest, which is the sect of the Sadducees, they are the descendants of the high priest and the priest in the time of the Greeks. And then the third group, which is the noblemen, rich family heads. Out of the three, so you have three groups in the Sanhedrin. The Pharisees, the descendants of the Maccabees, the zealots that were actually pushing people and even threatening them and killing them to keep the law of Moses. And the Sadducees, which were the high priest and the priest of the time of the Greeks. And then the third group, which is the rich people, the noble people of the country. Out of the three, the high priest was the most powerful. The Pharisees represented the most educated group of the three. So when the priests have a question related to religion, who do they go to? To the Pharisees. It's a shame. Like the priest and the high priest, they have a question regarding the law. They go to the Pharisees. But they contradict the Pharisees on things like the spirits. Man has no spirit. When they die, they die. There is no afterlife. There is no resurrection. That's what the Sadducees would say. The Pharisees can speak until they turn blue talking about it, and the Sadducees would say, forget it. In trials of the Lord before the Sanhedrin, we have the three persons. Caiaphas and Annas they were two high priests actually, a man and his son-in-law. And if you wonder why, because in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, he started doing what? Appointing and excusing high priests as much as he wants. So there might be 3, 4, 5, and it usually happened by bribing the governor. The one who gives him more money will stay in. That's why they say Annas was the richest person, the richest high priest in all history, because he stayed and he appointed his sons one after another, and he appointed his son-in-law by his money, by giving money to the Roman governor and to Herod. So Caiaphas represented the high priest, the Sadducees. Nicodemus represented a person from the Pharisees. He was a Pharisee. And Joseph of Arimathea represented the noblemen, the rich people. That's the three persons that you see in the gospel. Each one of them represents one of the sects of the three sects of the Sanhedrin. And that's it for today. We're coming to the end of our study of the Old Testament. Next time will be the last one. Next time we'll look into the poetry and the wisdom books quickly, just so that because I want you to know a little bit about the Psalms and the book of Psalms and the book of Proverbs. But this is as much history as I would ask you to keep. There's too much details in these areas and too much stuff about the time of the Greeks and how did Antiochus dealt with the people and what happened. But I would recommend that you read Maccabees, at least the first and second Maccabees, have all the history that you can think about regarding this time. I am ready to take questions if you are interested in asking a question. Quickly, we have 4 questions that we asked today. The first question is, what happened after the exile? Talked about what happened to the people. How did Jerusalem fare under the 4 empires? who was the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans, and who were the leaders of Israel during the Post-Exertic Period. And I wanted to make sure that you understood that the leadership was moved from the king to the high priest, and then the high priest fell under the rule of the Greek rulers, and they started messing them up. And then you end up with the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin is made up of those three groups. And that's it. Next time we'll get the last session in our Old Testament. If you started to feel giving up, don't please, we're done. Yes. Uh-huh. Yes. Yes. Was empty. So the question is, where was the Ark of the Covenant during the time after the return from the exile? Nobody knows. There is something from Jeremiah that's very clear. I want to show you that Jeremiah had said this. Is amazing, actually. Jeremiah 3, I remember if I'm correct, Jeremiah 3 speaks about the Ark of the Covenant. Here. I'm reading it from the Septuagint. Jeremiah 3. Here we go. Hmm? 16? Verse 16? Okay. So it says, it shall come to pass that if you multiply and increase in the land in those days, says the Lord, they will no longer say the Ark of the Covenant of the Holy One of Israel. It will not enter their heart, nor be named or visited, neither will this be done anymore. So they say they will not do it. They will not make the Ark of the Covenant. It will be lost. So Jeremiah had an understanding that this will not be. It will not happen. Yeah, he did. There were sacrifices in the time of Jesus too. They had the sacrifices going on. They most probably made new ones. Because everything was taken. They peeled the bronze and the silver and they burned everything else they could burn. So they had to remake everything new to continue the sacrificial system. And it's very interesting to understand how the Jews are surviving today without the sanctuary, without the temple. I ask this question. I say, in their mind, since they were a nation, since they actually came out of Egypt, there was a tabernacle. There was sacrifice in the place that God decided. And he told them, don't do it everywhere. You have to do it in the place I tell you. You cannot be just doing it in the States or in Europe. It has to be in Jerusalem. So how come today they don't have it? How they are surviving? What makes them clean? Because without sacrifices, they cannot expiate their sins. So where they're going with it? That's one of the questions I ask. How can you be a Jew and not have a sacrifice for 2,000 years now? I know the answer. They don't know the answer. That's the question. Actually, some traditions from their old tradition says the whole world exists because there is a temple in Jerusalem with sacrifices going on. So what happened since the year 70 AD? How come the world is still existing? In their mind. They actually go all the way to say, and then the Revelation would say this, that there is a shaft to hell. There is the well to hell. And that well that leads to hell is in Mount Moriah, on Mount Zion. And that's why God asked Abraham to take his son and sacrifice him over there, to keep that well closed. Only thing that keeps hell from exploding on the world is that there is a sacrifice going on always on that place. That plugged it, that kind of sealed it. Okay, it's not there anymore. Why is not hell loose? That's the question I ask. Because that's in the book of Revelation. He said he saw an angel coming down from heaven, and in his hand he has the key to the well You see, where is it? I saw a great angel coming down from heaven, and in his hand was a key to the shaft. Can we get this out? We speak about this, and I think it is, well, it might be early. Huh? 20? Thank you. 20. Oh, here it is. So you say, and saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. So this is the one that's going to take the devil and throw it into it. And that's, what do you say here? The great nether regions, where the disobedient are confined, awaiting final judgment. The demons fear it. It is reached through a chasm, the key to which is in the hand of the angel. The great chain binds Satan. So that's something they believe. And we too believe it, that there is actually Hades, and the Hades is the place where the condemned are locked, the bottomless pit. Okay, any other questions that we need to answer? I have something in the chat. Okay. If Korah was a Levite, why did he rebel against Moses and Aaron? Why was he jealous? Me? Huh? I see. Okay. So Korah was a Levite as a deacon. So he wanted to work as a priest. Not all the Levites were priests. So you have to understand the Levite tribe, it's the big tribe, was responsible for serving the tabernacle. But a group of them, which is the family, just the family of Aaron, that's it, was supposed to be the priests. The rest of the tribe was servants, deacons. So they wanted to serve as priests in the tabernacle and offer incense and slaughter animals and sacrifice and all that stuff. But they were not given that job. And they said, it is democracy. Why are you so special? We are the tribe. We're all consecrated. But they got punished for it. Was jealous because they couldn't do what the priest did. The priest had a more a special place for service. Okay. All right. All right. Any other questions? Let's pray. So next time we'll do the last session of Old Testament and we'll be done. And I will keep the review after Holy Week. We'll do a session or two on review and then we'll do the test. Make us worthy, O Lord, say thankfully, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. In Christ Jesus our Lord, thine is the kingdom, power, and glory now and forever. May the love of God the Father and grace of his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you. Leave in peace. Peace.